to work on recreating this Isaac model that I created in Blender. I'm still relatively new to Blender, new to modeling, new to sculpting, all that, but I wanted to kind of share my processes and try to help someone else maybe understand how I'm doing this. So we're going to see how this goes, and yeah, we'll get started. Now I will have the hotkeys turned on, so if we look here, down in this right hand corner, you're going to see all the button clicks that I make are going to be recorded. So pay attention to this for reference, and it should help you kind of follow along. I'll probably miss mentioning a few shortcuts, but if I do, here you go. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm in rendered mode right now. We're going to switch over to solid mode. And that way, we're not trying to do this in rendered mode. So to get started, we're going to shift right click to set the cursor. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to hit Shift A, and we're going to bring in a cube. Whoops, cube. Now, we're going to hit S to scale this down a little bit. Now, the reason I'm starting with a cube is I can hit it with a modifier to give it more of a rounded shape and sort of start the deform that I want to create. So if we hit Control 3, it's going to hit it with a subsurface modifier. So if we go over here, or a subdivision modifier, you can see that we applied that modifier, and you can hit, how many you want, 3, 4, 2. We're going to start right about 3, I think. So what we'll do is with the object selected, we'll hit edit mode. And you're going to notice that the box shape is still around that sphere. That's because we have not applied this subdivision modifier yet. So we'll go back to object mode. We'll select it, we'll hover over that modifier and hit Control A. So now what's happened is we've applied that modifier to the shape. So when we go into edit mode, we can actually edit the vertices and the faces and all that stuff now, which is precisely what we want to do. So we're going to select that shape, go into sculpt mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to start kind of playing around with the sculpting tools. And you'll see that I drug this out so you can kind of see the tools that I'm using right here on the left. So we're going to start with the grab brush. And what we're going to do is we're just going to sort of, well, actually, you know what? Go back to object mode. Let's rescale this real quick. So it's a little bit bigger, more like this head here. Okay. Oh, real quick. The other thing I'm going to do, I wanted to mention, I'm going to leave each stage of this as we go so that we can kind of keep a record of what we've done. So it'll kind of help give us a sort of a point of reference on where we've been. So we'll go into sculpt mode. And if you look at the grab brush, you see the yellow circle on the screen. That is the size. If we hit F, we can increase and decrease the size of that brush. Now, smaller will have less influence. Larger will have more influence, as you can see. We're going to go, we'll start right about here. And we're going to come up here and turn symmetry on the X axis. So what's going to happen is you'll see 2 yellow dots right there. So as we do this, it'll affect both sides, not just one. Okay? Now, when doing this, we don't want to take this and drag too far like this, because you're going to majorly deform that. We're just going to sort of, move around the shape and just sort of deform it a little bit. Bring it up a little bit, bring it down a little bit, bring it out a little bit. I just want to make it look, not like a perfect circle, more like a little bit of a head, or what would be a head shape. And there's really no right or wrong with this. This is just playing with how you think the head would look, right? I want it a little bit wider. Okay, a little bit wider down here, a little bit wider up here. Yeah. That's looking pretty good. A little bit more for me. And obviously, I created the this model here the other day. We're not going to do it exact. I mean, pretty hard to recreate something exactly every single time. So it'll look slightly different, and that's okay. I mean, we're just leaving that up there for reference so that you guys can see kind of the end product of where I'm going. All right. So we've kind of sculpted that in. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the object mode by hitting tab, select object mode, and we're just going to rotate this a little bit because I kind of like that head on a slight rotation, right? Now, we're going to hold shift, right click to reset the cursor, and what this does is wherever the cursor is where the next object inputs. So we're going to put it right about where the body would be. Hit Shift A, choose cube. And we're going to hit it with that modifier again. So Control 3. Now, what I want to do is we're going to reapply that to it so we can edit the mesh. So hover over the modifier, hit Control A. Good. We're going to hit S to scale that in. So I'm thinking right about here. Now, you'll notice this body is longer, right? It's got a longer shape to it. While this body is just a little round, little round ball. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit S to scale. But if we do a regular S scale, it's going to scale the entire shape. So what we can do is hit S and then hit Shift Z, and it will modify so that it only scales on the X and Y and not the Z. So if we go and we look at that, you see how much smaller that shape is now. So then we can resize it with scale. We can move it. We can do all those things that we wanted to do, right? And there you go, starting to take place. Now, I will say this before we get too far into this. I'm kind of assuming that you know some of the Blender shortcuts, like how to move objects, with G, Y, and on the Y-axis and Z-axis, and how to move and how to rotate. If you need a primer on that, you might want to look at like a hot sheet guide or something, or again, refer to this down here in the right-hand corner. But I will try to say them as I do them. So with that there, I'm feeling pretty good right about where that is. We're going to hit Shift D, which is going to duplicate this. And then what we're going to do is just scale that down. And then we're going to scale it on the Z-axis. Whoops, sorry. Nope, scale it on the X-axis. You see what that did? Now, you'll notice that didn't, take in the back as well. So we'll actually do Scale Shift Z, and we'll do that again. Just like we did with the body the first time. And then we'll move that thing into place. Now, if you hit 1 on the numpad, you can view the front of the file. 3, you view the side. So then we can hit G and drag that thing back right about here. And we'll scale it just a bit bigger. Yeah, a bit bigger. Not too much more. Okay, good. Now we're going to hit Shift D and copy it straight over on the X axis. All right. Now, I want to move them, so we'll go a little more like this. And this is just sort of eyeballing. And you'll notice, you may already notice, that we're keeping a very low poly look to this. You can see all the edges and the ridges and all that stuff. We're doing that right now because all we're basically doing is getting the character into the shape that we want it in. We're not really worried about the clarity of it yet. We'll work on that here in just a few minutes. So we're going to take this shape, we're going to go into sculpt mode, and we're going to bring up the bottom so that it sort of rounds off the bottom of the foot here like this. You see that? We want that a little more square instead of that rounded shape. Good. I'm happy with that right there. So what we'll actually do is go back to object mode. We'll delete this by hitting X and hitting enter. And then we'll shift delete this over on the X. And you see when I hit the X, it constrains to that X axis, which is, what you want to do. It keeps it easy for you. So hit GX to move. And then if we select them both with shift, we can hit X and move them both like this. You see? Good. So we got our legs in place. We're going to select this leg, hit Shift D, and move that up. Now, you'll notice if we go to the front view, these arms are off to the right-hand side. So we're going to kind of go for that same look. We're going to see if we can't get that. Now, one thing I will say is that this entire shape here, if we go to the top view, has a slight rotation to it on the other object. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then what we'll actually do, we'll move this down so there's level. Now we're going to take this shape, go to the side, and we're going to rotate it up so that we can see it. Now there's another way to do that. If you're looking toward the front, you can rotate. If you hit R to rotate and you hit, let's say, Z, you're going to see the axis it's rotating on with that blue line. So if we rotate it, it's only going to rotate on that axis. Or we can hit Y, which is going to rotate on that axis, or we can hit X, which is going to rotate on that axis, right? So you can kind of get a visual of the axis that it's going to move on. Same thing with moving. We hit G and we hit X, it's going to follow that axis. Y, back and forth, and Z, up and down. So, it gives you a visual reference. So what we're going to do is just kind of get this thing into place. And then what we'll do is we'll just kind of move it around and get it where we're happy with it. You know, there's no real secret to this. This is not that I've found anyways. We're just sort of sculpting, moving to the side, moving the arm out, you know, just playing with the shapes and trying to get what we want. And you're probably looking at this thinking, man, that doesn't look good the way they're joined, but we're going to fix that. So we'll select this arm, make it slightly smaller. We'll hit Shift D to duplicate on the X, and we'll just move it over. And now if we look at the front, these arms are turned up just a bit more. Not a whole lot, but just a bit. So we'll just kind of go like that. Good. So we have successfully recreated the model, I think, to the most part. If I look at the head, I think this one's a little wider. So I'd like to go back into sculpt mode and just sort of bring it out a bit more. Right? And bring this in a bit more. We're just messing with the meshes here at this point. The other thing we can do is we can hit this and we can scale it on the X and we can kind of play with how wide it is. See that? Looking good. So we'll go scale X. And we'll just kind of play with it. And I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to save this as, and we're going to call this, we're going to hit M, hit new collection, and we're going to call this stage 1. Because what my goal here is to kind of show you guys the steps in this process, right? Like I wanna keep a kind of a visual reference so you guys can see the steps on how this was made, and then you can sort of replicate this if you want. So what we'll do is we'll duplicate stage 1 and we'll call it stage 2. Right? Now with stage 2, what we're gonna do is we're going to select all of stage 2 and hit GX, and we're just going to move it over. And there we go. So we have the original that I did the other day. Here's what we just created, and here we're going to move on to this. So now we're going to start looking at turning this into a more smooth finish. So we're going to select all the shapes, and we're going to hit Control J. And what that's going to do is make one object. You can see up here how it went from all the cubes to one cube, right? Well, what that does is if we go to sculpt mode now, the whole thing sculpts as one shape. We don't have multiple shapes being sculpted, right? So that's good. Now, in sculpt mode, we can still see all the faces and everything. Right here is a remesh mode. What this does is as we stretch this out, you see how those are starting to get stretched way out? The remesh will basically remesh those back to the original shape. So if we hit Control R right now, you see how it remeshed back to the original sizing, quote unquote? But it broke a lot of these here. So we'll hit Control Z. And what we're going to do is we're going to lower this voxel size. Okay? So we're going to lower it down to, I don't know, let's try like 0.4-ish and see what that does when we hit Control R. Not bad. I think I'll go a little bit lower. We'll go down to like maybe 0.3. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about this. So if we look at this character now, you notice that the legs and the body and everything are joined into one shape. They're all one shape now. So we no longer have like separate pieces, or any of that stuff. So actually, I think I'll go with 0.2. Now, the lower you go, you know, the more it's going to have, the more detail it's going to have everything. This is up to you on how far you want to push this. Obviously, the more you have, the higher the strain on the machine, and you know, the more parts you're going to have and everything. So that's really up to you on how you want to handle that. All right, so for now, what we're going to do is we're going to get into sculpting this. Now, we could use the grab brush and we could move things around. But before we do that, I want to grab the scrape brush. And I want to explain how this works. If we run the scrape brush over the front of this, you see what that's doing? That's removing those lines and those intersecting points. And it's making it look more like a clay object, or like more of a kind of a sculpted object. So it's it has a, you know, that less cylinder feel to it. And now you see we started influencing the arms because we went down. So if we hit F, we can make this smaller. We can get in here and do spaces like this, right? We can kind of play with the way this is working. Now, you could have, you know, sculpted this out of shapes and just sort of hit the whole thing with a subdivision modifier and gone from there. I mean, that's a possibility as well. It all depends on how you want to do this. This is the way that I've kind of learned in watching some videos. It makes sense to me. So this is the way that I'm kind of starting to learn how to sculpt. And it's working so far for me. I like the look that I'm getting. And I'm okay with this sort of a clay, sort of fleshy look for Isaac. But yeah. So where you see these corners here, where everything's kind of blurry, what you're going to do is hold down Shift. And holding Shift brings up the smooth. So with any of these tools selected, you hold Shift, and you see what that does? It just sort of smooths those edges out for you. So they don't look so, you know, they don't look so, like, messed up. Right? Yeah. So, I mean, that's one way to do it. Now, I would want to turn this off, because with the head tilted, I don't want it to affect both sides at the same time, because what it's doing is, with the head tilted, it's actually shaped differently on each side. So I would go around like this. And then same thing with the arms. You know, they're on a little bit different tilt. Now, you can still see some of the poly here, right? We could go with a higher poly if we wanted to. I'm okay with where we're at right now with this resolution. You know, this is all a preference on what you're going for with whatever your model is. Okay. You know, I don't really know like how high you want to go with whatever you're modeling, but I mean, you know, choice is there. It's your model. Obviously, the higher you take it, the more work you're doing, and things like that. So with the scrape brush selected, we're just gonna keep kind of smoothing this out. And I wanted to show you, you can smooth on these as well. See, so like it's possible to smooth. Now the thing is, when I smooth here, it sort of deforms the material in a way. Instead of just scraping it, it sort of deforms it. But it kind of does the same thing. You know, so I use them kind of interchangeably. Like I'll scrape and then I'll sort of smooth, and then I'll scrape and I'll sort of smooth, and you know, like right here I'm scraping. But you got to be careful because it started to influence the stomach, right? So this brush has to keep getting smaller and smaller. So I may come through, give it a little bit of a smooth there, a little bit of a smooth there, right? And it just starts to work. You know, the character starts coming to life, and you start getting rid of some of these ridges, and things are starting to look more like a you know, sculpt. All right. And my plan with this is, as I learn more and as I do more, I'm going to share more. You know, like I'm a big proponent of sharing and education and trying to help people learn how to do this. And I really hope that these videos can sort of find the right folks, and that they sort of say, hey, you know, that's a pretty good process here. And, you know, maybe they'll want to adopt it into their workflow, you know. And on a quick note, on that note, I am using a mouse. I'm not using a graphics tablet. So this is absolutely possible with a mouse, in case you're wondering. All right, so we're going to hit clay strips. Now this brush, if we left click, it just adds strips, right? It just builds strips for you. Okay, but if you hold down Control, instead of adding, it will subtract, right? So you can burrow into the mesh. So I'm going to decrease this size a little bit, and I'm going to try to get the eyes pretty close to the original model, because I really like the way they look on the original model. So we're just going to sort of burrow in here like this. Okay. And then we're going to come over here, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to sort of burrow in. Just like that. All right. And then for the mouth, I'm just going to sort of start kind of burrowing in that shape right there. Now, you know, there may be better tools to do this with. I like this one because it's kind of wide, and it sort of gives me that look I'm going for. All right. Now, you'll notice it's all bumpy. So just hold shift. And we're just going to smooth all that out. Now, you'll notice the poly around the eyes gets a little weird, right? Like the shape. That's because we've deformed it. And really, at this point, we should do a remesh. But I'm not going to right now because I just want to sort of... I don't want to remesh the whole shape yet. I'm just sort of, you know, playing around right now. So we're going to hit G because I want to sort of move this in a little bit. So we'll grab X. I want to sort of move that in around the head a little bit so it has a little more defined shape at the top. I feel like it was a little too... You know, and my goal with this is to be able to create my own 3D models that I can 3D print. That's sort of where all this started. I was like, well, it'd be kind of fun to be able to, you know, create my own Isaac model and print them. So that's where we're at. All right, so we're going to go back to object mode. And we're going to hold shift and right click because we're going to place an eye now. So we're going to go to shift A and we're going to bring in a UV sphere. And then we're going to hit S to scale it. And we're going to put it right in that socket. Okay. And we're just going to sort of move this thing around. But before we get too comfy with it to get a better look, we're going to right click on it and go to shade smooth. And that's going to give it that more, you know, refined edge that we're looking for. We'll hit GY, we'll move it back. We'll hit GX, and we'll just kind of move it into place. Now, I'm not too concerned, like this is too far on the eyeball for me right now. We can sculpt that. So we're going to hit Shift D and just sort of move this thing over. And for right now, we just want to get the eye there and placed, okay? And that's looking pretty good for me. Sorry, you're going to hear my cats in the background. Hey, kitties. That's looking pretty good for me. All right, good. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that, see? Looks pretty similar to what we had there. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the body. We're going to hit Sculpt. And we're going to play around with some of these other ones, like the Draw one, right? We're going to make it smaller, turn off symmetry, and we're just going to sort of beef up these eyelids a little bit, right? And we're just going to kind of bring them out a little bit so that there's a little more shape there. And we'll kind of come under the eye with one pass, and we'll just do a little row right here, you know, trying to make this part of the eye just stick out a little bit more. And see, that's looking a whole lot better already, right? So we'll kind of keep looking at this. And all we're really doing is just looking at the character and going, okay, how can we make this better? What can we do? And there's a couple techniques I found. We can use like this draw sharp brush. And you can really indent and then hold shift and smooth. So if you're looking to create that sort of, you know, like that and then smooth it out, you can really create those distressing features on the face right there. So I'll just follow this eye like this and then hold shift to smooth it out. And look at that. You know, it really sinks that in around the eye. So it really gives you that expression of like, oh no, you know. And you could do the same thing under the mouth if you wanted to, if you really wanted to create like that chin look right there. If you wanted to, you know, kind of cut into this a little bit more like this and then smooth it out, you know, you absolutely could. You know, there's a lot of ways to use this draw sharp brush. I mean, you could, you know, make an indentation on something. But either way, that's pretty good for us right there. So, looking pretty good. We're going to go to object mode. We're going to go shift right click to set the cursor. Shift A. We're going to bring in a cube. We're going to get S and scale that down. Now, I don't want to join the teeth and the eyes and the tears and everything into the original body shape because when it comes to coloring, I do want to keep those separate. So we'll hit R to rotate this, and we'll hit G to move it up, and we'll hit S, X to scale on the X. And you can see it's sticking in front of the face, right? We'll come over here to the side, we'll rotate it down a little bit, and then we'll hit GY to move it on that Y axis. And we'll go right about there. Good. And you can see those little teeth. Now, I don't want them perfectly sharp like that, so I'm going to hit Control 3. And that made it really small, but it gave it that same sort of a mesh, right? Which then you can do something like this, and that gives you those teeth. Now, you're going to want to move this up and down. You're going to want to play with it. You know, you're going to want to scale it on the, I'd probably scale it on the Y so it's not so thick, you know, and you're going to move it into place, and you're going to want to build up the mouth and all that stuff. But we're just going to kind of leave it there for now until we kind of get in there and play with that. So we'll go back to the body. We'll go to Sculpt, and I'm going to take the draw, make this even smaller, and just sort of build this up around the teeth. Okay, now you can do that, or you can go back to the teeth and you can select it and move it forward, move it up, right? Go in here, and this is where you're just going to want to kind of play with things. I mean, there's different brushes. There's the inflate brush if you just want to inflate this part of the mouth, you know. The other thing I think I would do is I would grab the draw brush, hold control, and kind of sink that back in a bit more. Because remember, control will sink it backwards. Good, that's looking better. Take this, give it a little rotate, move it up. Good. And that'll make more sense, of course, when we color it. Right now, you're just kind of looking at the teeth in what is their sort of infant stage, right? I mean, there's some, you know, coloring that needs to happen there. There's a couple things that need to happen there, but you get the idea. Okay. And of course, you could put a tongue on the bottom, or however you want to handle that. We're going to go back to object mode, shift right click, and we're going to hit shift A, and we're going to add an icosphere. And we're going to bring this thing down. Now, the idea here is we're going to shift to duplicate that. We're going to put one there. We want to turn these into the tears for Isaac. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go into sculpt mode, hit G for the grab brush. Okay. I'm going to make it bigger. And then we're just going to start modifying this thing. We're going to, you know, move it around. We're going to kind of work it into the eyes. We're going to do things like that. Now, if it starts stretching out, hit Control R. Control R is going to be your remesh. And it's going to allow you to just kind of keep moving this thing where you kind of want to get it. And again, Control R. Now, like I was saying when I you know, started this, I'm not a Blender guru or anything. Like I'm still very, very new to this whole process. So if you guys have any suggestions, comments, etc., feel free to let me know. I'm all ears. I'm taking some things I've learned, watching some tutorials and watching different people do this, and I'm just sort of kind of create my own little workflow so that I can start working on, you know, little projects that I want to work on. Because there's some things that I want to make and do, and, you know, I've got to learn this stuff if I want to do that. And so that's what I've been trying to do. I've been teaching myself and trying to learn little bits here and there, and, you know, trying to take it in and just see what I can do. And that would be a big tip, you know. I always tell people, like, the best place to start is just start. You know, people, they always say, well, you know, I can't learn this or that. And it's like, well, you just got to start trying somewhere. You know, don't worry too much about the little stuff. Just make something and make something else and just keep trying. Okay. Good. So we got the tears started there. And of course, you know, we can choose like this elastic deform, and we can, you see how that changes the whole shape. Hit Alt R. You know, we can drag out more tears. We can, you know, there's a lot of different things we can do here. But this is just sort of the start. We'll go back to object mode. We'll select this one, sculpt mode, and same thing. We're just gonna move this into being. And there we go. Now, again, we'll hit Alt R to remesh it, and we'll just kind of drag this down the face. And then here, we'll drag it up. You see, and I'm just sort of, all I'm doing is clicking this thing, resizing the brush with F, and I'm just sort of moving it and modeling it around the face. Now, one thing I will show you here, like, let's say we wanted to pull an extension of this out. Make this real small, so the influence is real small, then pull it out. You see that? If the influence is real big, you're going to drag the whole thing at once. So you want to make it small, you know, That way you can move things around. You can, you know, sculpt things in and out and down. And yeah. Because it's real easy to get to where you're like, you're influencing too much of the shape at once. It's really easy to do. And I've done it. So just kind of, you know, keep it simple. Influence little bits at a time. Bring things down. You know, we're going to go like this. We're going to bring it up on the face. Going to go like this. Keep it in sculpt mode. We're just going to go with the elastic deform. And we're just going to pull this thing down. Okay. Now, I think what I would do is go back to grab. And just sort of, you know, bring this up. That way it has more of that look to it, right? Now, that's looking pretty good. What we're going to do is I like to take this just like I did on the face. And we'll just do some lines like this in the shape, right? And then we'll just kind of smooth them out. And you'll see it just creates that extra texture in there. It's not necessary, but I just kind of like it. Then we'll come over here, do the same thing. Put this line right here, and then we'll just smooth it out. There you go. See? Now, again, we can make these tiers as long as we wanted. We could do all kinds of things with this. You know, we could put little extra dropping off in the 3D space. I'm not really going to do disconnected objects like, you know, droplets here and whatnot, because I do intend to 3D print these. So for me, it's more of the final goal is to be able to put these on a printer. So I don't want like floating objects. I want freestanding. But yeah, so we basically started with this. We moved over to this, and now we have this shape. I feel like this is a good spot to sort of, you know, take a look at the object. Of course, we can sculpt it here. We can remesh it. That way it remeshes right there. And everything's looking pretty good. Now, you can see in here, you can see some of the polygons and stuff. And again, this is kind of a low poly, high poly mix. I mean, you can decide how far you want to go with it. We could remesh this and make the polys even lower. We could make them higher. We could do all kinds of things. But I think this is a really good basis, a really good starting point for what this is. Now, for a 3D print, I would probably sculpt a base as well, like a round base or something to put this on. And we may actually do that. That way I can kind of experiment with the 3D printing side of those. So, yeah. For Guppy, the cat. So all I did here was sculpt Guppy the same way. You know, fleshed him out, put him in the location, and then warped the face and the tears to lay on top of Guppy. And it just kind of shaped him into being right in that same spot. So basically in object mode, you just come in here and you shift right click, and you know, you just build those little tiny shapes in there. In fact, you could probably even copy this state over if you wanted to and just modify that and then just make it a different object. And then of course make the face and the tears interact, or however you want to do it. You know, you could have Guppy hanging by tail or whatever. But anyways, I think this is a good stopping point. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know. Again, I'm very new at this. I'm just trying to pass along what I've learned, and hopefully it helps some folks. I can probably say I'll be doing a whole lot more of these, more Isaac characters, other characters, custom characters, things like that. If you guys would like to see me finish this out, you know, actually make the cat in his arms and sort of sculpt some of that out, let me know. If you guys would like to see how I would go about coloring this in Blender, again, let me know. Glad to go ahead and make that if you want. But for now, we'll just kind of turn this back on to rendered mode so you can see this one with the finish, this one with the low poly, and then here was the original Isaac that we made a couple days ago. So anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you guys had fun. I hope you learned a couple things. And yeah, please let me know what you think, and have a great day. Thank you so much.